think we'll get started with starting to welcome everybody. As I mentioned, we're so pleased that everybody could join us this morning. We're expecting a big crowd. And for those of you who do know JCF, of course, you've seen our work, you know our services, and we're thrilled to be able to present this program to you today. For those of you who don't know us as well, just as a reminder and a refresher perhaps, who we are here at the Jewish Community Foundation is very simple. We have a really strong belief that we're committed to building our Jewish communities, a flourishing Jewish community, and advancing sustainable, just, and vibrant societies. If we do so here in San Diego and around the country, in Israel and across the globe, we'll be all better for it. As a matter of some statistics, it's really fascinating to know that in our history, for the last 53 years or so, we facilitated over 1.8 billion in grants into those communities over this time. And in the last 20 years or so, JCF donors have granted over 650 million specifically to Jewish organizations. So we're super pleased and very proud of their work, and thank you all for making that happen. Currently here at the Jewish Community Foundation, we manage over $750 million in assets for individuals and families like you, and a lot of our local institutions that choose to hold their cash reserves and endowments here at the foundation. And at the end of the day, we believe that every individual has the power to make a difference, and together we can change the world. Now, it's important for us to just take a moment to recognize that obviously the war in Ukraine and the horrible circumstances there has been on our minds for some weeks now. And at JCF, we've done our best to keep you informed with our Know, Act, Give updates, which we hope you all see. And if you don't, you should go on our website and take a look, where we can share a variety of ideas of ways that you as donors can help the people in Ukraine and the people who are formerly from the Ukraine with your own philanthropy. Whether or not you're a donor advised fund holder with us, we do have those resources available on our website. In addition, we held a wonderful confidential webinar for donors with a group of volunteer activists evacuating people from some of the most dangerous parts of Ukraine. They call them not just dangerous to reach, but almost impossible to reach, places other people would not want to travel to. And we've been so pleased that our donors have been incredibly generous and risen to the occasion, recommending over $3 million in grants in just the past couple of months that have been distributed to more than 50 organizations doing this impactful work for the people of Ukraine. So thank you for that. In addition, we'll continue to provide unique insights to all of you. And on May the 5th, keep a note, save the date, we have a special briefing with Oksana Golkovich, formerly from the Ukraine, now residing in Israel, who's the Deputy Director of JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee's field operations in the region that includes Ukraine. She has really a vast, unique knowledge, and she's going to share with us how the JDC has been and continues to work in that region, and with some information about what's happening on the ground in real time. You'll receive more information about that webinar after today's program. And then in addition, I'd just like to take a minute to share our continued work in our Give for Homelessness in San Diego initiative. This is an incredibly innovative secular homeless initiative called Give For, obviously. And it is the Jewish Community Foundation's way to engage all of our constituents, not only our fund holders, but everyone in San Diego, to participate in a big local challenge, in a big local issue. We've started with homelessness. There might be other issues. There probably will be other issues moving forward, but it makes giving impactfully much simpler. It helps educate you and others on those complex issues which we're all grappling with. And it helps to tell the stories of the nonprofits that are taking on different aspects of homelessness. We have 12 highlighted in this particular group, and there are lots of others. Interestingly enough, since its launch less than a year ago, about 9 months ago, we've seen over $1.3 million in impact from Give For, facilitated by the Jewish Community Foundation. We've had in-person gatherings to learn from people with lived experiences of homelessness. It's quite remarkable. And we've hosted volunteer events and taken donors to site visits to the nonprofits that we're sharing and that are part of Give For. If you've not yet had an opportunity to participate and you'd like to learn more about it, here's the place to do that. Of course, you can reach out to Ali at any time or any of the team here at the Jewish Community Foundation. Please consider looking at that givefor.org as well. We have a great website that will help familiarize you with the grantees that are part of this cohort. So let's move forward now. While Give4 is focused on secular homelessness in San Diego, and we really spend a lot of time curating the right kind of organizations to consider, today we're going to talk about a subject that is a little closer to home, and that is poverty in our own Jewish community. It's a really important topic. Today's session is going to be a really robust discussion and information that you'll all learn about. And I'm happy to turn it over to our moderator for today's session, my colleague, Oli Ben, Jewish Community Foundation's Director of Philanthropy and Social Impact, who's going to tell you about a unique collaboration happening in our community to address this very pressing issue. So Oli, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Charlene. This is the poor bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who are oppressed shall come and eat. Anyone who is in need shall come and partake of our Passover. Today we live in a world imperfect. Next year, may we live in a world redeemed. Today we are enslaved. Next year, may all be free. As we begin to think about gathering around our Passover Seder tables tomorrow night, I can't think of a more apt topic to think about and consider than the one we're going to discuss today. Many of San Diego's Jewish nonprofits have been working behind the scenes in a working group on Jewish poverty, and we felt it was the right time to lift the veil a bit on the journey of this working group, what we've all learned together, and where we might go from here. This was an initiative convened by Federation that has quickly become a highly collaborative project. So I want to introduce our panelists, who are all members of the working group on Jewish poverty and stability: Darren Schwartz, Jessica Court, and Carol Yellen. Darren is the Chief Planning and Strategy Officer at the Jewish Federation of San Diego County. Darren works with Jewish organizations, community leaders, and members to identify and respond to broad issues facing the Jewish community, including Jewish poverty, enhancing community security in the face of rising anti-Semitism, inspiring Jewish leadership, and developing personal connections between San Diegans and Jews in Israel and around the world. Jessica Court is Director of Communications and Strategy for Impact Cubed and Lichtag Foundation. She oversees communications for the foundation and its initiatives, streamlines the vision and purposes for Lichtag Commons, and designs ways for the foundation to increase its impact and leverage across funding areas. Through Impact Cubed, she supports the capacity of collaborative efforts that expand and deepen impact across our community. And finally, Carol Yellen is the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships for Jewish Family Service of San Diego, where she has worked for more than 12 years. Carol leads the JFS Center for Jewish Care with the bold vision of ending Jewish poverty and strengthening community. Carol was awarded the 2019 FBI Director's Community Leadership Award on behalf of JFS for their volunteer public service in support of law enforcement efforts in providing victim services following the 2019 Chabad of Poway synagogue shooting. Before I begin, as always, feel free to put questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we will address those at the appropriate time. So let's start with a very big picture question. Is there Jewish poverty here in San Diego? What does it look like? And Darren, perhaps you can explain to start why we started this project by looking at national trends before even talking specifically about San Diego.
Thanks, Ollie. And thank you everybody for joining us today for this important topic. One of the core tenets of being part of a Jewish community and a Jewish communal value is caring for Jews in need. And in San Diego, we've institutionally cared for Jews in need for over 100 years, thanks to Jewish Family Service and synagogues and Jewish agencies that have been here. But recently, I think out of a lot of encouragement by some local leaders, starting in 2017, 2018, we started being interested in an audit of what does Jewish poverty look like in San Diego. The Jewish Community Foundation, Jewish Federation, Jewish Family Service, and the Issachar Foundation teamed up to do a local study of what was going on. But at the exact same time, you had national organizations like the Weinberg Foundation, Jewish Funders Network, Jewish Federations of North America, also looking at Jewish poverty from a national lens. And it's through the kind of confluence of all of these things happening that we're starting to get a much better picture of what Jewish poverty looks like today. Now, I'll talk in a moment about a report that we were able to put together about Jewish poverty in San Diego that came out in February of 2020. Of course, we have seen a new layer to what poverty looks like in the wake of COVID. And so we're continuing to learn about that. So we'd like to just take a moment and share with you a bit about what we've learned nationally and locally about what Jewish poverty looks like.
Great. Thank you so much to JCF for prioritizing this important issue. And like as Darren said, it's such a staggering issue that there is a national affinity group on Jewish poverty, thanks to the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation and Jewish Funders Network. They are responsible for coordinating a lot of teachings, conversations, but also research and making that all available to all these communities who want to work with that information in their responses. I'm going to give a couple of numbers, hope that they all land, that come from two data sets. The Pew Research Study on Jewish Americans from 2020, so that's pre-COVID information, and then a couple of figures from community studies that come from individual communities about their demographic information of their Jewish communities. And San Diego is going to be doing our own later this year. We'll talk about it a little later because it's very relevant to this conversation. So just a few standout data points. Economic precarity is sort of this instability. And, you know, we talk about Jewish poverty, but they use this nomenclature of economic precarity. So 20% of Jewish households earn less than $40,000 a year. And that is one measure of economic precarity. Not knowing where certain basic needs will come from is another one. And up to 12% of Jewish households self-report that they can't make ends meet. Beyond that, so not beyond can't make ends meet, is above 15% of Jewish households are just managing or just barely making ends meet, barely getting along. So we have these two measures. One is earning a certain salary or income, and the other is self-identifying, self-reporting that they can't make ends meet based on their income and their expenses. Predictors of this instability of economic precarity across a few characteristics. I'm going to run through them. There are two that are particularly interesting in the context of Jewish poverty, and then the others certainly follow predictors in the general population associated with poverty. So we know that older adults often are on fixed incomes or are earning less, and they are 2 times more likely to earn less in the Jewish community and earn less than $40,000. What's interesting is those who are between 30 and 49 years old are actually 2 times more likely to not be able to make ends meet. So we actually have 2 groups of people with different measures of precarity. Ultra-Orthodox Jews are 2 to 3 times more likely to be financially insecure. So they're making less or they're barely meeting their expenses. On a different end of the spectrum, Jews of no religion are 2 times more likely to be financially insecure. So that's a Pew term, Jews of no religion. That's people who identify as atheist or agnostic or nothing in particular, but have some sort of affinity with Jewishness or Jewish identity in other ways. So other predictors, just to share them, are women, especially single, divorced, or widowed, Jews of color, people with disabilities, and people who grew up with economic struggle. And an interesting takeaway from these predictors, I won't draw any conclusions, but is that many of these factors also make people less likely to be connected to community. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. As I mentioned, individual communities are conducting studies to get more granular information that's relevant to their own factors. And San Diego is so unique as far as affordability. And in our case, a lot of these figures are from before COVID or the beginning of COVID. And our study will end up dealing with information after this time of great inflation. So we're going to see a really interesting picture of our own community and be able to compare it to some of these national figures. And the last thing I'll share, being able to be associated with this national affinity group, is we know what other communities are doing to respond. And some of the themes are an emphasis on dignity, minimizing barriers to access, fewer stops when it comes to figuring out where to go for help and having to repeatedly tell the story to get that right help. And then on trend here, data-centered and therefore human-centered orientation to designing those solutions.
So that's some of the national information. And then what we learned locally, and again, this was about 2 years ago, one of the biggest takeaways is that the poverty in the Jewish community and instability is not that much different than the general population, but that in and of itself is a learning, because I think the assumption both within and outside of the Jewish community is that Jews tend to be better off than the general population, and that is not what we found. Some of the other kind of major takeaways is that living in poverty is far more complex and harrowing than not having enough money for food or pay rent and to get medicine, which means that, you know, we're going to have to look into strategic long-term plans. There are multiple reasons people end up living in poverty and multiple ways that they experience and deal with poverty, which means that there are no silver bullets out there. Jews in San Diego County are amongst the least effective users of local, state, federal, or communal benefits available to those struggling with poverty, which, you know, we'll talk a bit about what we're able to affect as a community and not through philanthropy. But there's a lot of resources available through the government, and it turns out that our community might not be the best at helping people navigate to those resources or accessing them themselves. And finally, based on our interviews, we did interviews with individuals as well as individuals experiencing poverty, as well as professionals working in the community. And based on the interviews and research, we confirmed that a multifaceted approach is necessary to address issues faced by people living or struggling with poverty in our community. Now, these, you know, this sounds a little bit clinical, but I'd like to, you know, kick it over to Carol to talk about what are you actually seeing at JFS and what do the various faces of those struggling with poverty look like?
Thanks, Darren and Jessica and Ollie, for inviting me to speak today. I appreciate the opportunity to share what we've been seeing. As Darren shared, you know, we have been involved in our kind of community's effort to understand Jewish poverty since before the pandemic. As many of you know, JFS is actually, I think, 103, 104 years old at this point. And so this is work we've always been doing, but I will recognize that we are aware our community has sometimes questioned our commitment to serving the Jewish community, as what makes the headlines is our work around safe parking or immigration. But we really invested in doing this work over the last 100 years, but more readily with our partners here pre-pandemic, and of course have seen even more need arise as a result of the pandemic. With generous support, luckily, from the San Diego Jewish Community COVID-19 Fund, we were able to kind of double down on those efforts that were identified in our most recent strategic plan to really understand Jewish poverty and dedicate more resources to it, understanding that we are a unique service provider who is obligated, right, to serve our Jewish community, and that many other secular providers are not going to focus on things like Holocaust survivors. But that is one of the places I would like to point out that we see some of this, as Jessica was sharing some of the national, you know, information and older adults experiencing poverty at higher levels. That includes our Holocaust survivors. And it's yet another myth that we have to overcome in our community, that Holocaust survivors kind of aren't here anymore. We estimate there's about 500 still living here in San Diego, and we actually took on operations in Orange County in the last year as well. So those are some of our lowest income, most vulnerable individuals in our Jewish community who are struggling to make ends meet and who really need our support. But as we kind of saw the pandemic unfold, it certainly uncovered a lot of new need, right? People who had lost hours, lost a job, lost a small business as a result of COVID. Many of them were showing up in our food distribution lines. And I would say that is the biggest increase of need that we saw since the start of the pandemic. And food has always been the entry door to services at JFS, because it's sometimes the easiest thing for a person to reach out and ask for, even though even that sometimes is a hurdle based on stigma. But when someone shows up in need of food, it's the opportunity for all of us to ask, what else is going on here? And so that opportunity during the pandemic and seeing the increase in the need for grocery support or home delivered meals allowed us to wrap additional services around, including rental assistance. But more than anything, in addition to the new need, we saw that it was exacerbating chronic pre-existing need, specifically from older adults on a fixed income and those who have mental health challenges. Many people are not connected to community, as Jessica said, and don't have a support system. So having a service provider to turn to feel that they have someone to walk alongside them, to create a plan to help them be more stable, or even just to get on the phone as they are trying to navigate CalFresh or SSI when that feels insurmountable. People who are experiencing poverty often can't look beyond today, right? Your stress is, how am I going to have food on the table tomorrow? Not how am I going to afford rent in 3 months? It's really a today focus. And so by pairing people with case managers, with wraparound supports, which now not only JFS is doing, but thanks to some of this recommitment by our community to address poverty, we have local partners doing this work and complementing our services like Kindness Initiative, like Hebrew Free Loan. And so I'm excited as we get into the next part to really talk about how those collaborations are coming together to more fully embrace the individuals we're seeing who are experiencing poverty. But really what we hope you walk away with from today is to recognize that poverty existed prior to the pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated those needs. And what JFS knows from our experience from the Great Recession is that this is a long journey to stability, that the impacts of the pandemic, even as we are now out and about, masks off, right, in our workplaces and schools, really is going to take years to recover from, especially as all of you have seen at the gas station, at the grocery stores, rising inflation. So that's what we're seeing on the ground. And as we move forward, I'm happy to share some of the examples of how our service providers are really wrapping around some of these individuals and collaborating on their cases.
Great. Well, thank you each for that overview. And I think that by itself was a lot of information, a lot of statistics, and kind of reflects the scale of the challenges that we're facing. So Darren, as you went through this learnings period, how did you kind of focus down on some key questions? Like, what are some key questions that you came up with that the working group could address?
Yeah, so we got some key questions out of convening that we had. Some of you on the call might have been there when we released the report in 2020. And the three questions that we're really looking at then, and we're still exploring right now, is in what ways do people experiencing poverty look to the Jewish community to address their challenges? In which ways do they look outside of the Jewish community based off of whatever their particular needs are? How can the Jewish community collectively respond to poverty-related challenges? If there's hopefully many takeaways from today's call, but everybody should understand that there is tremendous work happening at individual organizations that are all part of this working group. And we're exploring what is additive about us working together. What will bring our community forward? And last is, how do we balance high priority issues? Mental health has come up a lot, housing has come up a lot, with those that are the most actionable. And that's some of the harder conversations that we've had to have over the past couple of years.
And yeah, I think those are the right questions, and you've already sort of hinted at this, but and it's, so I'm going to ask Darren and Jessica to kind of go first on this, even though this question is about providers, and you do not work for providers, Darren and Jessica. Darren works for the Federation, Jessica works for Impact Cubes and Leash Tag, but because of this need for collaboration, which was already happening, but because of this heightened need for collaboration and increased collaboration, how did you guys see the providers addressing the problems? And then we're going to ask the providers also to talk about what problems they faced individually and collectively. So maybe you can kick that off, Darren.
So the question is, how have we learn more about how the providers are serving clients. Well, Jessica and I, and we'll talk about the working group in a bit, we did a lot of looking at what is in the community with organizations like Jewish Family Service, Kindness Initiative, Hebrew Free Loan, and so on. And we've seen tremendous programs and services that are being offered. Carol and I actually, we went out and we talked to rabbis and heads of schools. And one thing that we've noticed, I think collectively, is that when people identify as being in trouble or in need, they enter vastly different doorways for help. And it's not always easy to help these people navigate to the services that they need. Jessica, did you want to jump in on that?
I can add just what an honor it is to work with these professionals. They are the experts, and as Impact Cubed, it's a nonprofit started by Leach Tech Foundation, and we're here to help with the connective tissue in collaborative efforts for social change and educate the community about them. So, putting first and foremost the people who are doing the work and are the experts, and we're just that glue. And it's been an incredible privilege to hold that regular space for them, to work out what each other is doing and how they do it, ask the important questions, and to see the tone and the relationships evolve with each meeting. There's such enthusiasm, and we keep asking, do you want this space? And it's resounding. We need this space to build the trust so that we know each other even better and we can work together when there is an emergency. If we don't have that standing foundation, it'll take that much longer to get there. And we see issues worked out in that hour together, and a plan of action for whether it's a client that they share or a specific issue to respond to. It's incredibly productive, and I'm just so honored to be part of it.
Great. And so now we're going to hear from some of the providers. Unfortunately, one of the challenges of doing something right before Passover is people tend to go home to be with family. And so both Bev Paminsky from the Kindness Initiative and Mindy Frankel are out of the country. Mindy Frankel from Hebrew Free Loan, although I do see Mindy in the attendees list today. So welcome to you. So first of all, we're going to ask, we're going to play a video from the Kindness Initiative, which Bev recorded ahead of time, and then one from Mindy from Hebrew Free Loan, and then Carol will talk a little bit more about JFS in this collaborative space. So through the magic of technology, we'll show you some words from Bev.
Good afternoon. My name is Bev Paminsky, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kindness Initiative. The Kindness Initiative was established in August of 2020 to address Jewish poverty in San Diego. Our mission is to alleviate poverty within the Jewish community by creating customized plans and personal support for individuals seeking assistance. Personal dignity, kindness, and compassion are key attributes that define how we address each individual's unique situation. Our goal is to help individuals navigate and access existing resources provided by community organizations, agencies, or government programs. Kindness Initiative addresses the emergency needs of these individuals and then customizes a plan with goals working towards self-sustainability. The area of greatest challenge is that of affordable housing. While there are many programs to support issues such as food insecurity, mental health issues, legal aid, we are finding that the ability for some of these individuals, especially those on a fixed income, to secure affordable housing is extremely difficult. While Kindness Initiative is able to provide some financial assistance towards accommodation, this is not sustainable as a long-term means of support. What is clear is that the depth and breadth of poverty in the San Diego Jewish community is underestimated and misunderstood. My hope is that with the convening of the Working Group on Jewish Poverty.
Great, and we'll finish we'll actually wrap up with Bev's final segment a little bit later. So the Kindness Initiative is a relatively new nonprofit in San Diego, and another new organization is Hebrew Free Loan of San Diego, which offers interest-free loans to the Jewish community of San Diego County for emergency expenses, education expenses, family development, starting a business, or many other needs. So now we're going to show a quick video from their CEO, Executive Director, Mindy Frankel.
Hebrew Free Loan, one of our main goals is to make sure that we offer dignity and compassion with every loan. And it's very difficult for people to ask for help. And you feel vulnerable and you feel scared and you feel like sometimes you failed because you can't take care of your family or pay your debts or get your car fixed or pay your rent. And so we work really hard to make sure that our loan recipients don't ever feel that vulnerability and that we are here to help them and that everybody gets into a situation sometimes that they need just a little extra hand up. And there's no shame in that. And there's no reason to feel uncomfortable about asking for help. And to make sure that these loans empower people.
Great. So that was Mindy Frankel from Hebrew Free Loan. And finally, Carol, do you want to speak to what JFS is doing and seeing in this area?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues, Bev and Mindy. I think two of the words that I heard in their videos that resonate so much through all of our work are dignity and compassion and recognizing the strength and vulnerability that it takes to reach out. We've actually heard from people in our Jewish community that sometimes actually turning to a Jewish service provider can be harder, thinking that the community will know their business in some way. I think all of us are equally committed to making sure that we maintain the privacy and dignity of anyone who turns to us, and we would keep their information confidential. One thing, though, that we are seeing is the ability to speak to some of these clients, get what we call a release of information, which allows us then to actually work collectively on behalf of individual clients, maximizing the resources and skills that each of our organizations brings to the table. So, JFS, as I said, has been here over 100 years. And so people know us, right? That we have food, that we have transportation, that we have case management. And with the launch of the Center for Jewish Care, we've really dedicated a team of case managers to have the cultural competency and use our expertise in all of these areas to wrap services around individuals, which includes things like accessing government benefits, but might also be using our own transportation services to get an individual who wants to go look at an apartment, right, that is more affordable, but doesn't have transportation. Well, we have transportation. We just needed to learn and get funding to be able to leverage that to get the ride. We have food that has historically been for older adults in our community based on county funding. But we have a kitchen creating food every day. We have a food pantry with groceries. And so how can we still give that to a family who may not be an older adult and qualify for county programming, but how can we maximize those resources for the individuals in our Jewish community who are struggling to make ends meet? And so I would say that, our staff has been very flexible and nimble and learning a lot about how we can actually work internally to better use our resources and then externally with our partners. And so I know that I alluded to this collaboration, but I'd love to share, a couple stories of ways that our organizations, Kindness Initiative, Hebrew Free Loan, and JFS have been working on specific clients. And so I have so many, and so I'll try to keep them short. But we had one 70-year-old woman. We use pseudonyms oftentimes, but this is Helene. She had reached out because she, during COVID, was about to lose her housing. And as we were talking to her on the phone, we finally got to have a Zoom conversation with her. And in Zoom, we actually came to recognize she was living in the garage of the people who she was renting from and sleeping on a couch. We knew that wasn't sustainable. We knew she was about to lose her home. And so we kind of figured, how can we help? Thank God we got to see that on Zoom. She also was struggling with her SSI on an appeal that continues to go on today. But we knew housing is one of the issues that you've heard, Bev alluded to it, and we've said so many times that it's very difficult here in San Diego, and only more so as a result of the pandemic. Finding a new place for her to live on not just a fixed income, but also almost no income, really takes all of us to examine where are we going to find housing resources. So Kindness Initiative was brought in, and they were also helping her research. I'm happy to say we've moved her. Unfortunately, we've had to move her about 4 different times because of the way the rental market is working right now. I know that we were able to access something that Darren will probably allude to a little bit later on called Kulam Babait, which is a fund for some emergency gap funding for older adults. Knowing that she would have a place in about 2 weeks, we accessed that funding to put her in a hotel so that she wouldn't be on the streets. Kindness Initiative has set her up with what their Adopt a Family program and angels who kind of serve as mentors, while JFS has continued to help with the groceries, with social support, and just recently happened to match her with another client that we knew was in need of a caretaker in her home. And so Helene is now getting approved to become an IHSS worker, which is a county-funded caregiving service, to live in this woman's home with her, rent-free for caretaking services. So these are really creative ways. You can hear how many people are wrapping around. Helene is very unique. She doesn't really have a support system other than the service providers who are connected with her right now. But I will tell you, she has tremendous will and perseverance and resilience, because she is a partner in this work. We are not doing it for her. We give her the resources and she helps look for those things. But that's just one example of a way that, as Darren said, there can be no wrong door. So whether she came to JFS first or Kindness Initiative first, the idea is that we're all listening for what are the needs, what are the resources each of us has, and how can we partner with each other to wrap around and support individuals who are facing sometimes what feel like insurmountable challenges like housing.
So thank you. And that's a wonderful illustration of the collaboration. So maybe actually, so we spent, half of our time talking about the problem, and, there's this working group that's been, working behind the scenes. Let's start to talk about what are some tangible things that have come out of that working group so far and where it may go next. So actually, I think, Carol, you might just want to pick up on where you just left off.
Right. Well, so I think that collaboration is really a big piece of what has resulted. So we're so grateful to Federation for hosting and facilitating that space, along with Jessica, who does a great job in making sure we have consistent times to meet. And some of our early work, especially as Kindness Initiative was new and developing, was just to learn from each other. What are the services we're providing? What are the resources we each have to give? What expertise do we have? So Kindness Initiative has, recruited an army of angels who are our volunteers serving in a mentor capacity. And so JFS is constantly referring to them for that work. And likewise, it was important for JFS to really educate Kindness Initiative and Hebrew Free Loan on what does it mean when we say we have nutrition and transportation services, right? What does that look like? And especially helping them understand that we've moved beyond some of the old restrictions of this is a county grant only for individuals in these zip codes with, of this age group, to saying we are trying to, make sure food goes to anyone in our county and our Jewish community. We are finding creative ways to use our transportation. And because we are each kind of innovating as we go and learning from what we're seeing in the community, sometimes those services change, or the offerings we have change, or the volunteer who walked through the door with a special skill set changes. And so really having an opportunity to learn about each other's services, educate, figure out what's the best referral pathway. We've shared referral forms with each other. We hope to make more progress on that in the future, but we're seeing the referrals happening more readily. We're seeing communication lines up. So the silos of yesterday, really have started to break down, and it's not just benefiting our organizations, but benefiting the clients that we're seeing. So I think that was an initial key piece of this work. And I'm also happy to report that the conversations are not only the ones that are facilitated by Federation. We have standing individual meetings with each other. And I would say our case managers and resource navigators are on the phone with each other multiple times a week, coordinating on behalf of the individuals we serve.
That's terrific. And it's wonderful to hear that, you know, the organizations are working together in a spirit of collaboration, and it's not just good for the organizations, but it's really good for the individuals as well who you are serving. Darren, I think there's another tangible that you wanted to talk about that's come out so far.
Yeah, and it really ties in very nicely with what Carol was saying. You know, our role as a federation is to convene, to bring together partners and to talk about like what are the issues, but oftentimes we are not the direct service provider. So I get a wonderful opportunity to hear what's going on. And there was a few meetings where I know that Bev and Carol were talking about a client that they were working with together, a few different clients. And I was learning a lot about some of the day-to-day challenges that they had. And one of them was very similar to the client that Carol talked about, a senior in the community, that there might have been a long-term solution, but in the short term, you know, JFS was already putting them up in a hotel. Kindness Initiative was already helping them get to, you know, appointments and that kind of thing. And then there was going to be a need for additional funding for a longer period of time. So what we ended up doing at Federation is creating a fund primarily for the members of this working group that would provide short-term grants to help keep these seniors afloat while the long-term solution was coming to fruition. And we forwarded those grants in advance of need because we want Carol and her team and Bev and her team and Mindy and her team to be able to act knowing that there is funding available for them instead of trying to have to find it. We called this program Kulamba Bait, everyone at home, because we want to be there for our seniors and we want to be there as a community.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Jessica, do you want to talk about the EOTC?
Yeah, this was a resource that exists and is for this population, the earned income tax credit, because we can look at something so intensively and promote it out, saturate our community with information about something that already exists. It was sort of a test of a couple of things. Nonprofits that are leveraging public funds and resources for people facing poverty, and then how we can get it into the Jewish community. It would test how we can spread awareness about a resource that's available, as well as basic facts about Jewish poverty, and try to up the level of awareness in our community and see how that information filters down. And as a result, it actually received a lot of media attention for the work of the group. And thank you, Darren, for doing a few interviews about it. But it's a good example and just a test case of like a very small thing. And I encourage anyone to learn about the earned income tax credit, especially as taxes are due or filing extensions are due, and tied up with the resources that we know about poverty. And in addition to some of these tangible things, I'll just share in our process, we prioritized what we want to focus on, and Carol kind of went through that process, but that in of itself was really good work that was trust building and eye-opening as far as definitions about words and terminology, and you say this and we say the same words, but it's different approaches. We conducted community interviews to test some assumptions that we even share, that our professionals even shared, and experiment with basic versions of concepts that we've come up with and brainstormed because we only want to move forward with things that have legs. We met with experts in the community, including 211 San Diego, about models that we might adapt or even adopt. And that could be exciting, just again, taking advantage of what already exists. And like Darren said, we've made a priority to be informed by people who have experienced poverty so that we can really share what it looks and feels like.
Great. And in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of zoom us forward a little bit. And I see there are some questions coming in that we'll get to. And thank you. And if you have additional questions, please submit them in the Q&A or the chat. But, you know, so we've talked about short term, we've talked about some big picture questions. What can we expect to see, going forward from the working group, and what are we trying to focus on?
So I think we're still leaning into the no wrong door concept. One thing that we are very mindful of is we're looking to expand. We want to expand our working group to other Jewish institutions. People present at camp, at their preschool, that they need help with tuition, but there's underlying challenges. We want to create a system that makes available everything that the Jewish community has to offer. We want to continue, like Jessica was saying, to lean on our nonprofit partners like 211 San Diego and United Way, and continue to learn with them, as well as the Weinberg Foundation and Jewish Funders Network, the Poverty Affinity Group, and bring some national learnings to San Diego. As a group, we've decided we really want to focus on housing. And right now we're continuing to try to understand how do we work with property managers and owners to get those that are struggling and those that are in poverty appropriately housed. So you can see some housing projects coming out. But as you see in this diagram, there is a lot of brainstorming and testing. We're doing a lot of learning. Those are just some of the things. We are not here to solve poverty. We're here to respond to it and address it, and hopefully help people that are part of our community get out of poverty and into stability as quickly as possible.
That's great. Thank you. And so I would say before we get to the Q&A, one of the things that has come across today is obviously this is a big challenge. It's a huge challenge, and there's no, as Darren said, there's no silver bullet. I think there's lots of individual approaches that are going to need to work on, a lot of collaboration. But I think one takeaway is that this is a society-wide problem, locally, nationally, and we as a Jewish community are not going to fix it without taking this as a responsibility for the entire community. And so in terms of specifics, that means that the nonprofits that you already support, we would say it's incumbent upon them to start thinking about how this work is part of their responsibility as members of this community. How can community organizations that don't necessarily think of themselves as social services organizations become part of the solution? And one example that we actually discussed yesterday as we were prepping for this was about Hillel here in San Diego. So food insecurity is a surprisingly big issue on college campuses, and Hillel was thinking of putting in a food pantry on campus in the Hillel building. And so JFS has actually been helping get food into the Hillel food pantry, and the organization is now working together to think through how they can offer additional supportive services to the students who need to get food from the food pantry, because as Carol said, if a student presents with food insecurity, they may have other needs as well. And this is not only providing a benefit to those students, but it's also helped Hillel engage students that they wouldn't have previously engaged, who didn't previously think of Hillel as a resource to them. So this is an example of a community organization that we don't traditionally think of as a social services provider, but it's nonetheless taking responsibility for Jewish poverty to the next level, and we're all kind of working in the same direction on that. So I just want to compliment the roles of Federation and Impact Cube / Leashtag, Darren and Jessica, for leading this and not being afraid to try things that may work, may not work, and just explore and keep pushing, because without your leadership, we wouldn't be in the place where we are with this today. And I think I'll give the last word to Bev from the Kindness Initiative, because I think it's a nice way to wrap up before we get to the questions.
My hope is that with the convening of the Working Group on Jewish Poverty and Sustainability and our organization's collaborative participation with other organizations represented in this group, we collectively will develop a better understanding of the problems facing the sector of the Jewish community, giving strength in numbers to the work we are able to do together to assist those most in need. Kindness Initiative recognizes that the needs are great, but we are proud to be part of the solution.
I appreciate those words. So a couple questions have come in. The first one is just, are we, is there an ask being made today of people financially? And, can you talk a little bit about where money could go, Darren?
Yes, there's not a specific ask today. As I said at the top, addressing the needs of Jews in need and poverty has been something that our Jewish community has been doing here for over 100 years. You've heard today of some really fantastic nonprofits that are doing things for the Jewish community on the ground right now. As Bev has just said, she is proud to be a part of the solution. Everybody is playing a role. You cannot go wrong with supporting any of these organizations this year and in future years. Yeah,
I think that's right, and I think as the working group sort of progresses in its work, we will come back with some more ideas of ways to help. But Carol, another question that came in was, beyond money, what can people actually do today?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? What's our call to action? And so, yes, there's definitely opportunities for funding, but all of our organizations are also open to accepting volunteers. We also need your hands. So I know here at JFS, now that we've launched the Center for Jewish Care, we have many opportunities throughout the work, obviously not just for our Jewish community, but specifically for our Jewish community. I mean, in the last few months, we've delivered, I think it was like 300 Purim Mishloach Manot. And just this past week, we've gotten 600 Passover packages out the doors. Those don't just get delivered magically. And our staff is trying to keep focused on answering the phones and really helping people. So we need volunteer drivers. Likewise, I know Kindness Initiative, if they were here, would be saying that they, are always open to welcoming angels, the kind of mentors. We have, opportunities to volunteer with our survivors locally. And I know, of course, in the news right now, we're getting inundated with calls about how to help the Ukrainian and Russian asylum seekers. And so there's always work to be done. And we hope that actually by volunteering, you're getting to know people who have need and really understanding the human experience. Because I think that goes so far in really breaking down these myths. So whether it's for our Jewish community or beyond, volunteering is a great way to get involved.
Great. And then we had another question about going back to when we talked earlier about the collaboration, the greater collaboration that's happening now between the organizations. And the question was just, how does that actually work in practice? In what ways does it work well? Is there overlap? Are there gaps? So I don't know who wants to take that. Maybe Carol.
I mean, I can say part of the conversations that we are having is to kind of compare where are we seeing need and where are we struggling to find resources. So identifying those gaps, and then hopefully with this group trying to find some innovative solutions, which above and beyond just us meeting also requires advocacy by our community. And sometimes that's in the voting booth. So pay attention to the policies that are coming out that impact us locally around housing, and think about how that might be impacting our Jewish community, as well as extensions of benefits and things like that. But as far as duplication goes, again, I think that's why we're holding these conversations. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We want to complement each other's efforts. So where JFS has food resources or transportation resources, rather than Kindness Initiative building its own food pantry, right? They know, okay, we can refer to JFS for food services. And likewise, with Hebrew Free Loan having come into existence, JFS actually now refers all Jewish clients who would benefit from a no interest loan to Hebrew Free Loan rather than our own loan program, because Hebrew Free Loan has more extensive categories and higher thresholds of what they're able to provide. Likewise, Hebrew Free Loan, if they are approached by someone who's not part of our Jewish community, we'll refer to JFS because we have resources beyond just the Jewish community. So we're always looking out for those duplications and really figuring out how we can complement each other instead.
Okay, well, with that, I think we're actually going to wrap up. Somehow we managed to squeeze all that content into an hour, which was which I'm very happy that we managed to do this. And so I'll just finish by saying, this is part of us, our service as the Jewish Community Foundation is to bring people together just to educate our community and make sure that people are aware of what the pressing issues are and how the community is coming together as a whole to address it. So with that, thank you so much, and wishing everyone a Chag Sameach. Enjoy your Passovers. Thank you all.